You are listening to Road to CEO, nothing but in-depth interviews with executives about their journeys as CEO. I'm your host, Will Marlow, and I hope you enjoy the show.
What obviously everybody would agree is really difficult is recognizing the difference between a dip and then you're going to come out of it versus like this is going to be a permanent downtrend in this industry.
Welcome to the show. We're here today with Brock Boyd, CEO of CMI Careers, which he founded in 1998. Based in Tysons, Virginia, CMI has helped companies conduct over 3,000 successful searches to fill top sales and sales leadership positions in technology firms. Brock has been a CEO for 23 years, and today he's going to tell us what he's learned in that role. Brock, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about your business? What is CMI Careers?
So we're an executive search firm. Our focus is filling sales and sales leadership positions for technology companies, as you mentioned. The majority of our clients are smaller companies. So let's say between 50 and 500 to 1,000 employees is a technology or software company with between 50 and let's say 1,000 employees would be the sweet spot of who we work with most often. And we're filling sales and sales leadership positions within those companies.
So why do people need to work with a company like yours? Is it, I'm a CEO of a company, and why would I work with a company like yours rather than just trying to find all my own positions and fill all my own roles in my company?
So there can be a few different reasons that someone will put a position out to a search firm like ours, but the biggest reason is they want to be guaranteed that they're getting access to the best talent available in the marketplace, right? So the most likely way to do that, or let's say if nothing else, a great insurance plan is to put that search out to a search firm like ours, and then we're bringing you talent as well as whatever you're developing on your own, and in the end you hire the best person. And if it comes through us, then the company's going to pay us a fee for that. And if they find that person on their own, the person who they end up making the offer to on their own, then they don't owe us that fee. But either way, they got access to the highest number of top talent available in the marketplace today.
Yeah, and I asked that question, but I already knew the answer because I expanded my company into another country, and so I now operate in 2 different countries, and I found, especially with the new country, which I didn't know enough. I didn't know anything really about when I started. I mean, I knew people there, and I thought I knew what I was doing, but really, when it came to finding talent, I did not have access to it in that other company. And so I think that was really eye-opening for me, how working with that type of a business really just erases that disadvantage. You no longer need to think about the fact that you don't have deep roots. I mean, because no business as they grow is going to have deep roots in every community. So, as you expand, I'm sure that a business like yours becomes truly essential for that kind of growth, to find the top talent.
Yep. Yeah. Finding and hiring top talent is challenging. And if it weren't challenging, then we wouldn't have a job or a company, but It's challenging. And so, that's our area of focus, and we make it less challenging for ourselves by having a tight enough range of what we recruit for, that we end up developing relationships and industry knowledge and so on that makes it a little bit easier for us. But no matter what, it's always challenging, and that's why we exist.
Yeah. Okay. So this show is really about CEO growth also, and what kind of lessons people would learn as a CEO. And so I want to ask some questions about that. Did you always want to be a CEO?
No, I would say I definitely didn't. It was a little bit more of, I'm going to separate into, entrepreneur and, start a business. Yes, I had a long period of time where that was a goal of mine. but being a CEO and running a business, I view as slightly different. And so there's certain people who are born with the inclination and the desire, and sometimes the talents required to be a CEO specifically, and to run the operations of an organization. And I would not say that was always me. That it was a little bit more of like, I did always want to start a business and be an entrepreneur. And in order to hire employees, that turns you into a leader and a CEO. And so I was a little bit more forced into that second part.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually that leads me to another question. You have had a long career with CMI Careers. Were you CEO of any other company before you started CMI Careers?
No. In fact, I would actually say I was never technically a manager of a single person ever prior to starting CMI. So I didn't come to the table with any management experience, that's for sure. I did have a couple of other entrepreneurial ventures, but I never hired any. These were things that I did completely on my own, without any employees, without any team. So I could not call myself a CEO prior to having my first full-time employee, which was at CMI 23 years ago, when I was 23 years old.
I'm a big fan of that methodology of training somebody, just throwing them into the deep end like that. So I started my career on Capitol Hill. I became a press secretary for two members of Congress. And I remember I started off as a deputy press secretary, and in retrospect, I didn't even know what a press secretary did. I knew I wanted to be a press secretary. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what a press release was. But I also didn't know that I didn't know what any of those things were. But I remember there was one day where the press secretary couldn't be there, was out. He called me and he said, trial by fire. You've got to run the press conference. We're, just, do a good job. and so I had to, try to figure out, how you run a press conference and how, and you know what, it went okay. There were a few bumps in the road, but overall, I think that whole, approach to a career has served me pretty well. So I don't think there's any problem with, somebody who really, somebody taking a job and learning as they go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that the fact that I had no management experience prior to that whatsoever, it made managing, the very first people a little bit more exciting, to be honest, right? And so it gave me a lot of vigor and energy to go study management. Now, as you would agree, I'm sure, you can study management your whole life, and it's a subject like finance. It's like the farther you push into it, the more there is to learn. But anyhow, like I said, it gave me, I think, some enthusiasm for learning about that, because I had never done it before. So it's like, well, guess I better figure this out pretty quick.
So let's talk about that. So you've already mentioned managing people, which I think is one of the critical things, obviously, of being a leader and being a CEO. Since you mentioned management of people, why don't we start there? So what was that like when you first started managing people? Did you take to it quickly? Did you have to read books to kind of, were you uncomfortable at it? What was that experience like?
No and yes. I was definitely uncomfortable with it, and I did not take quickly to it. I have been incredibly fortunate that I don't know if this was by design, but no, it definitely wasn't by design. I don't know if this was, sheer luck, or if deep down I knew that this is how it had to be. But I have mostly hired people who have a pretty strong internal engine. So they've all been pretty self-motivated. Now, they still need a lot of guidance to do their job correctly, in the beginning. But I've just been incredibly fortunate. So my lack of management experience and skills was made up for by the fact that I hired people who were really driven. And so it kind of, I feel like it removed some of the toughest parts of management for me. And instead, if you think of like, recruiting, like painting, I could focus on, well, here's how you paint the corners, and here's how you do this, the sun or a beach or whatever. I could focus on the technical aspects of it instead of making sure people are arriving to work on time and, actually doing the hard, activities. Once people knew what the activities were, I've been really lucky that I've hired people who generally just do those activities. And so now it's about kind of help them do those activities more efficiently. And then they get to a point after a certain period of time where, they need and possibly want my assistance and guidance less and less and less. But in the beginning, I give a whole lot of guidance, but like I said, I've just been very fortunate in terms of the people that I've brought on board, not having to be the driver in terms of whipping people into shape and trying to force feed work ethic. I'll put it that way.
So, okay. So you've said something that really resonates with me. One of the epiphanies that I had, and actually, I don't know if you call this, is it an epiphany if you learn it from somebody else? I don't know if it is.
It can be. I think it can be. Yeah.
All right. So the great wrestler Cale Sanderson, who I'm sure you know because you and I are both wrestlers. I happen to know that you were a great wrestler in high school and in college, and I watched an interview with Cale Sanderson, who is has won more NCAA titles at Penn State than anybody in the last decade, I think. Somebody said, how do you motivate your wrestlers? How do you motivate the kids that you bring into your program? And he said that he recruits people who generally don't need motivation. You recruit self-motivated wrestlers. And I remember that was really mind-blowing to me. It seems so obvious, but he doesn't spend his time. You think of a coach giving this rousing speech, and I'm sure there is something to that, but you also don't want to have to give a rousing speech every day to to your stars, and as I read through management books and recruiting books over the years, I started noticing that was a trend in the biggest management gurus said you recruit people who are amazing, who are self-motivated, who are go-getters, and then a lot of what you're talking about, Brock, falls into place. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And it kind of ties in with something that I think is not a particular strength of mine, but I would say that if you hire the right people into your organization who have the right traits already, either because they were born with them or because they were instilled by somebody else giving those daily rousing speeches, right? If you recruit those right people in, they will not need the kind of daily push, right? They will still benefit from being held accountable and being praised in the most effective ways, right? And that is one of the things that also I would say is not particularly one of my natural strengths. And I've read about it and learned about it through management training and so on, but I don't do a particularly great job at holding people accountable at the right times in the right way, or a particularly great job in praising people at the right times in the right way. But I've just been incredibly lucky that the people that I've hired are thriving despite that.
Yeah. Let me grab something that you just put out there. So you say you aren't, it doesn't play to your natural strengths always to praise at the right moment or to hold people accountable at the right moment. How have you dealt with that? Like what is something you've done to, it's a weakness and it's something that you have to do. So what have you done to kind of deal with that?
Two things. The first is one that we already covered, which is that I think instinctually I'm looking for people who are so kind of self-driven, and it's not just about motivation, but are so well kind of balanced in their head that my lack of natural talent there is going to be less of an issue, right? Because they're going to be doing this. They're going to be either they require less praise and accountability than the average person. Yeah, actually, I'll leave it at that. I think that instinctually, I'm somehow looking for that. But the second thing is I try to make up for it by being good at other things. And so one of those things is when I see either an individual or the team as a whole running up against a really, really difficult challenge, that's when I'm the most likely to step in and try to, through sheer force of will, show this can be done, and I'm going to do it to keep people happy, motivated, excited, and interested and engaged to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
makes sense.
It does, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm always interested in kind of understanding how people think about traits that they know are important, but they consider to be a weakness in themselves. And I Warren Buffett would say, at least I think he would say, that he focuses on his strengths. He doesn't worry about the fact that he's not a talented musician, for example. He's focused on allocating capital, and when he talks about allocating capital, he seems like that's the most important thing in the world. And I guess if you're him, it really is. And, but it's, I feel like it's important for CEOs and people who want to be CEOs to probably take a lesson from that. You're not going to be great at everything. Or at least I'm not going to be great at everything. And, I think it's one thing I've learned from talking to CEOs is, and maybe this isn't true for all of them, but, many of the good ones are aware of things that are weaknesses on their part. Maybe they aren't going to fix them, or they're not going to obsess over them, but they're going to be aware often that, okay, this is not a strength of mine. And I think that often leads them to focus on something else, maybe do a little bit of compensation for the thing that is, I know for me, there are certain things that that I'm not, that are not strengths of mine. And I have dealt with that by hiring people who have strengths that in those areas. I mean, that's one thing that I've done, because I know I'm not going to focus on my own weaknesses. Like in some cases I will, certainly do enough to get by. But what I really want to do is put somebody else in a role that is going to, they're going to enjoy doing whatever that is.
Yeah. And you just made me think of a second component of what I think I do to compensate for, the lack of the ability to both praise and hold accountable at the right times in the right way. And that is that, if the goal is to move the ball down the field to the other end zone, if people can move the ball part way down the field and then they get stuck and they have a problem, I am both pretty good at and very, very willing to help solve that problem. Right. So that would be something that I do to compensate, I think, because, I think that some people in a leadership or managerial capacity might say, well, that's what I hired you for. So you solve the problem and keep moving it down the field. For me, maybe as a result of compensating for what I talked about before, I'm definitely going to jump right on the field and say, I'm going to help you solve this problem. And that's a scenario that I feel very comfortable in terms of more kind of both natural skill set and one that I've built over time, but also where I feel like I'm bringing value to people in that particular case.
Yeah, I'm sure your team appreciates that quality, because I know that, I know there are a lot of CEOs who would probably respond in that other way where, say, that's why I hired you to deal with this. And I'm a big believer in team morale and, and trying to do what's possible to make sure the morale is high, people are happy. I'm positive that your team probably appreciates that trait you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, so for me, going back to that analogy, if, somebody's at the 1 yard line and they're, either unwilling to try or don't know how to get started, I find that a challenge that I'm a lot less equipped to handle. But they can, grind and move it forward 20 yards, and then they encounter a problem that they've never encountered before. Then I'll work really hard and usually do a pretty good job helping them solve those problems and keep the ball moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask a funny question about technology here. So so you've been a CEO for 23 years. How has the technology that you've relied on changed over that period? Like when you start, yeah.
It's interesting because I am not an early adopter of technology. So generally, it takes multiple people telling me there's this tool that's a phenomenal tool, and it's helped me be more efficient or get better outcomes, results, whatever it is. And I usually need to hear it a couple of times, and then I go investigate and tend to adopt that thing. So I definitely cannot claim that technology. That I've been on the front of the frontier for technology, and therefore using things that helped me in my role in a considerable way. So my answer to that is a really boring one. I mean, I would simply say that the fact that we hold a computer in our hand, walk around every day with one of these that is actually a computer and we can do everything with. That has helped my life to be a whole lot more flexible, because then I can respond to important things quickly and easily, regardless of where I am or what I'm doing. So then again, going very basic, I would say, we have a database that at this point in time would be really hard to do without. But I just would not say that technology is very earth-shattering. So I think that what I've done that's a little bit more cutting edge, I guess, would have to do with using people to accomplish certain tasks in a way that's different than other companies in our industry. So yeah, I'm pretty boring when it comes to the technology side. I'd be more likely to ask you, hey, any technology I should know about that you think I should be using?
So I'm a very practical person. So for me, one of my weaknesses used to be personal organization. Now, there are plenty of people who would probably tell you that that's still a weakness of mine, but they didn't know me years ago when it was truly a weakness. And I remember I used this tool called Remember the Milk. And I would literally just, all it is a to-do list. And you could email an item to it, and it had certain codes. Like if you sent an email to the tool and you put the word today anywhere in the subject headline, it would create a task that was due today. If you put December 31st, it would create a task that was due December 31st. You'd then get a reminder, which I never used the reminders. All I used it for was this chronological to-do list. I loved it. I still love it, but I did stop using it. I stopped using it once my team grew because my to-do list shrank tremendously. And so I just didn't need it. But back in the beginning of my career, when I was first starting my company, I bootstrapped my business. I didn't take on any funding. I didn't, I did another business earlier where I took on capital and raised a little bit of money in a seed round. And for my current business, I bootstrapped it. So I was the key employee in the beginning, and I had such a big to-do list. It was life-changing to find that tool. It's not the craziest technology. It's just a chronological list, but I could log in every day at any point I wanted. I could see it on my phone. That was cool. I'm probably pretty boring in some ways with technology, myself. I use QuickBooks online. I use Slack for communication with my team. I use a lot of the tools that are kind of trendy, but I don't use them because they're trendy. I use them, because they solve a real challenge. But I guess it's tough to even talk about today because we're all using technology. We're using video conferencing software right now. We're using podcasting software to do this. Here's a different question. If you didn't have a computer and you had a phone with a great internet connection, could you run your whole business, do you think?
I do a substantial amount of work via email today.
Yeah.
Substantial. So, this is obviously different than 23 years ago when I did virtually, very, very little to nothing. that would take quite an adjustment.
Yeah, I bet it would.
It would not be an easy turn for me.
Yeah. I've been thinking more and more that I am actually somewhat close to being able to use my phone for everything. There have been a couple days where where I've tried that. And the interesting thing is it's pretty close. It's pretty, because now I've got QuickBooks Online. I've got, I've most of my stuff is available by phone. It is not as convenient as the computer. So I'm not saying that I would prefer that, but as an experiment, I've tried that a few times, and you can get pretty close to doing everything from a phone, in my opinion. Now, I don't know.
By the way, I misunderstood your question. I thought you meant, like, even though you said internet connection, I didn't pick up on what you meant. I thought you meant a phone, but like you can't send email, you can't go to websites.
No. Oh, yeah. Oh, I get it.
I see what you say. Phone as the computer.
Yes. Phone as the computer. Do whatever you want on the phone. Yeah.
So I absolutely could do it. It would slow me way down because I feel like I handle some sometimes complex concepts via email, and that would take me a really long time to write on my phone.
Yeah.
For example, when I'm forced to do something by phone, I'm almost like, well, then I'll just do it a different day if it's a complex thing I need to handle. Like if I need to write an email that's not like 5 words, I'll often just delay and do it when I'm going to be back by a computer or whatever. But certainly, I would guess that people below a certain age group would be like, "What are you talking about? My computer's collecting dust right now. This is my computer, and I don't even know what you're talking about."
I think we're getting to that now. In my business, I don't do a lot in Excel anymore. I do some stuff. Probably one day a week I'm in Excel fairly heavily. And, that has not been replicated yet on a phone in a way that's convenient. And I mean, that would take forever to use the Excel versions that are available on a phone, So in my industry, that's a factor, but there aren't too many other things like that are so phone oriented. That need to be done on a desktop machine. But yeah, so I think we're getting there. We're getting to a point where and certainly for some jobs like customer service and various other things where you can do a lot. And I've also used voice dictation recently a lot, and it's not to the point where I would be comfortable doing voice dictation to a client most of the time. I mean, for a long email, because that you're going to get some embarrassing typos in a voice message, but you're going to be 99% good, or maybe 97%. And I think that remaining 2% is important, because, you don't want, if 2% of your words are completely off, then you're going to look kind of foolish. But once they get that other 2%, that's going to be a big step forward.
Absolutely.
So, all right. So I want to ask you a tough question about, and this is a little bit open-ended, but how have you changed as a CEO? Like what would you, if we met you 23 years ago when you were first starting as CEO, how would you be different than when we meet you today? And the point of view, maybe to start with, could be like somebody on your team. Like if you hired me 23 years ago and I was, a new member of the CMI Careers team, what would you be like then compared to now?
So I was a lot more intense at that time, and that had pluses and minuses. I would say I worked a whole lot more hours than I do now, because I wasn't married, with any children at that point, which I am now. And so I did have a bit of an expectation that everybody's kind of working around the clock like I am to some degree at that time. Again, more intense, which has pluses and minuses. But I would say that one of the biggest differences is, if you asked me at that time, like, where do I see myself in the business in 5 years then versus now, I'd have, different versions of a successful outcome. So At that time, definitely my entire goal was based around the idea of building a very, very large organization. But I didn't really have a why for that. It was like what a lot of people do in a lot of areas of life, but I'm going to stick with my area of expertise, which is career. A lot of people think they should go into management just because, like, well, that's what you do and that's what you're supposed to do, right? And they don't have a really good why, or like, is that really for me, and what have you. And I didn't have a really good why, or is that for me, and why would that be important or valuable to me, or whatever. So, but I definitely would have told you, I want to have, a company with an employee count of 1,000+ people in 5 years. And we want to be doing this, and this, and all these different markets and so on. Versus now, I would say, sure, I would like to see some growth in the way of employee size, but I'm much more concerned with the degree of success with each individual within the organization. And I'd like to see each person within the organization, their success significantly increased over the course of 3 to 5 years. And as that relates to successful outcomes, and as it relates to their own compensation, I guess all measures of success in that way. So much more dedicated to the success of the individual team than I am saying, like, our success is defined by how much we've grown as an organization.
Interesting.
So I guess the forward-looking picture is very different from 20-something years ago.
Interesting. So, and so you said that you didn't have the why for your goals before as much. You wanted bigger, you wanted, you wanted to grow your company, but you didn't attach a why to that. And then over time, it sounds like you really took a more people-oriented kind of approach, where you really focused on the individual success of each member of the team, and then that ultimately, if every member of the team is doing well and growing, then the overall company is growing too. Is that kind of the attitude?
Yeah, and I guess the point is, I would have measured back then our success 3 to 5 years in the future by how much have we grown employee size and revenue of the business, right? And now I would measure the success in 3 to 5 years of the success of the individuals in my company today.
I see.
How are they doing? Are they doing significantly better than, in 3 to 5 years than they are today? If so, that's a super successful outcome. And the same goes for me personally, right? I'm a player coach in my situation, which means that I both I perform searches for customers as of today. I'm still performing searches for customers myself, as well as trying to support and support a team to be as successful as possible. And so I'm not going to judge at all the success of myself or the organization based on employee count 5 years from now. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's great. So how would you advise people to think about the why? You know what I mean? Like, and this is something I've thought about a lot. I can't say I'm an expert on it, but it always intrigues me when somebody brings up, the why when they're talking about goals. Cause obviously that's the key right there. Isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to take a crack at this, even though, I'm not Tony Robbins and I don't do this for a living, but, or Simon Sinek, I think, is the guy who wrote the Power of Why, or whatever it's called. But I think from my point of view, it's like, if you picture what you think to yourself right now is the successful outcome 5 years in the future, whatever it is, and you say that is the outcome that I want, then picture yourself there and say, why does that make me happy, right? And so if it makes you happy, so, you talk to the me from 22 years ago, and I would say, well, it makes me happy because, like, that means I've been really successful, right? Or that means that the business has been really successful. And I don't stop to think, do I want to be managing 1,000 people? Is that my natural path in life, is to manage as many people as possible? And am I going to be happy by managing this extremely large organization, tons of people? And the answer would be no, but I never would have thought about that before, right? And so now it's like, if I think, what if in 3 to 5 years our organization is slightly larger? Sure. Each individual inside of it is flourishing, having incredible success. I'm going to be super happy with that situation, right? It's not going to have anything to do with external optics, right? Other people think that is good, or that I'm, successful based on that. It is, genuinely, I'm in a role in a situation that I'm super happy with and excited about, and I feel really fulfilled. So, it's a hard thing to do, right? Is like when you're picturing your successful outcome, how much of what you're picturing is based on, external optics, right? When you dig in there, are you really thinking, well, people are going to think that I'm highly successful? As you peel it back, nobody wants to admit that in the beginning, right? But is that a core piece of what's driving you to want to do this thing?
Yeah.
And I can certainly tell you that for my goal to be, the organization slightly larger, but each individual is significantly more successful then than they are today. That has nothing to do with external optics, right? Or what other people think.
Yeah.
And when I thought I want to grow this to 1,000-person company, unfortunately, that had a lot to do with, how I'm going to be perceived.
I think that answer is right on. I mean, I think that's, I can't imagine Tony Robbins giving a better answer than that. So one thing, and maybe Tony Robbins even said this, on a slightly different topic. I think he was the one who said, if you're depressed, if you're not feeling good, the best way you can change that is by doing something for someone else. And I think there is something to that. And it makes me wonder, so you run a people business, what I would call a people business. It's a services business. I run a services business, a people business as well. And I wonder if there's something to this as it relates to CEOs of services companies and people businesses, where we over time really learn to focus on the people who are everything. If I hire somebody for my company, that person is going to be a key player in whether or not my company is successful. And I think other CEOs of services businesses like ours could probably relate to that. For anybody who's not relating to that, a product company sells a product, and that product, if you're Microsoft, you sell software all day long, and people and customers interact with the software that they buy, and they get mad if there's a bug, and they, and that's the key thing that makes people happy with Microsoft. If you're, talking to CMI Careers or the Will Marlow agency, there's no software, there's no product, it's the people. And, and if the people do a great job, then people say, oh, well, CMI Careers is amazing. If the people didn't do a great job, they wouldn't say that. Do you think there's anything to this, to the fact that you're a people company CEO, that you then have over time started focusing more on those people outcomes?
Absolutely. And because you bring up, you put it in a way I hadn't quite thought of before. And it's making me realize that, it's not 100%, it's obviously not 100% altruistic from my part, where it's like, all I want is great for other people. It's like deep down, that when you run a services organization, the more successful the people on your team and happier they are, those two things combined, your organization is going to be more successful, especially over time. And so, I think that you're also onto something with the whole product company part, where, if a really good person leaves a services organization, that's a vacuum, and they leave, period, end of story, right? If a really good person, a developer at Microsoft, leaves Microsoft, the code that they did along the way stays with Microsoft.
That's right.
So there's a permanent footprint of the good work that they did. And so I think it does automatically make a services-based business, appreciate team members' contributions more. The value of them being successful and happy, it forces you to appreciate it more. That doesn't mean there's not, software company CEOs that are, more dedicated to that than you and I, but I would say that the businesses that we are in, being services related, make that a little bit more automatic, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So was there ever a time when you wanted to quit? Was there anything come up that made you think, you know what, I'm going to pack it in? And did you overcome that?
So I don't think there was ever a time that I wanted to quit in the most traditional sense. There would definitely be multiple times where I thought like, boy, this would be a lot easier to just like be by myself.
Mhm. Yeah.
And not have a single team member. That has gone through my head in some of the very toughest of times. But I would say, luckily for me, the toughest environment that I found myself in from a business context was in 2002. And I was young. I was in my mid-20s, I think, mid to late 20s. So I still had tons of energy. And I wasn't married, didn't have any children, so I didn't have any obligations. So the thing that could have been the very toughest thing for me to go through, and it was extremely tough, came at a time that was very fortunate. So it just didn't, I was able to ride through that a lot more easily. And I remember it like it was yesterday, because I was slamming my head against the wall, working as hard as I could to push back against a recession that was not just a recession, but it was a technology and .com centric recession. And that's exactly who all of our customers were. So it was an extremely difficult time. But I feel like maybe the reason why I never came close to thinking about, giving it up or quitting or whatever is because, I had the youth and I didn't have the obligations that I have today that might have made my head go in some other direction. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, 2002, the .com bubble had burst, and that would have been a tremendously difficult time for a company like yours. Cause obviously I'm assuming very few software companies and technology companies would be hiring sales folks. Is that right?
Correct. They were all laying off. And then there were, luckily for the overall economy and our society as a whole, there was this massive growth in the mortgage and real estate related industry at that time. So they were soaking up a lot of those people. Okay. And for a variety of reasons, we didn't, take a turn into placing mortgage and real estate salespeople. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it was the right move for us not to do that. But it just took a really long time for that to settle and then to start growing again. Because there was just little to no growth and little to no hiring for an extremely long period of time in the market that we were in. And very challenging.
So step one was, you recognized that you had low overhead, you could weather a bad economy. So that's step one. Step two, it sounds like, was you made the decision not to pivot to a new industry. You wanted to push through because you felt like the economy would come back eventually, and that the people would start hiring, and you kind of you toughed it out to get over the hill. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I felt like switching into a new space would be like, turning the Titanic, right? And so is that really going to be worth it? Is this really what I want and we want as a long-term trajectory change or not? Because if not, and if this is what the business that we want to be in long-term, which I did want to be in this business long-term, I actually really enjoy what I do and like my customers, both the hiring managers and the candidates, I really enjoy it. So this is the business that I wanted to be in long-term. So it wasn't going to make sense to turn the Titanic for me just to get through this temporary period of time. And also, in the back of my mind, I thought, our contact base and relationships are exploding during this time because everybody's interested in talking because it's so rough out there. And so sure enough, when we came out of that, we were in a substantially improved position as an organization. We were very small coming out of that. It was, 10 of us going in and 3 of us coming out. But it paid dividends for all of us after that. And that was the worst environment that I've been through, save maybe 2 to 3 months of the right after COVID quarantines began.
Okay, sure.
And that really, really tough period of time was a lot shorter than the 2002, which felt more like an 18-month period of difficulty.
I love stories like that. So have you ever heard of the concept of the dip from Seth Godin?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so he wrote a book. I think it was called The Dip, maybe, and it was interesting. Basically, he said that all the best things in life come after the dip. If you start a business, everybody's excited, everything's fun. It's easy to get your first client, everything, and you're just riding this wave upward. But then inevitably things get difficult. You hire people, you do, the same thing with learning an instrument or doing all kinds of skills. Most people, as soon as they hit that dip, which would be the recession in 2002, in this case, they would quit. But I would imagine you came out of the recession, you probably had fewer competitors, you had a bigger database, as you said, and so it paid dividends. As soon as that tough period was over. So I love those types of stories.
Yeah, that's making me want to read about that from Seth Godin. And I've heard of his book. I think he wrote The Purple Cow, right?
He did, yeah.
So yeah, I know him. Awesome author, and makes me want to read about it because it's very true. And what obviously everybody would agree is really difficult is recognizing the difference between a dip and then you're going to come out of it versus like this is going to be a permanent downtrend in this industry, like when cars came around to the people who made horseshoes or whatever. And it's not always going to be easy and straightforward to understand the difference between A and B, but when it is a dip, it's going to pay dividends just as he said, to go through that and come out of it.
When you're doing your recruiting videos, you find when you're relaxed, maybe a bit distracted, your best work comes forward. Do you find that with anything else when you're in your role as CEO, like anything else where you try to achieve that?
The closest thing I can think of is if I have to have a conversation that is going to be thorny and going to be difficult, and I have good reason to believe that someone's going to be not thrilled with the information I'm passing along. I find those conversations to be, I am more effective taking those calls in the car.
Interesting.
So once again, distracted by other things while,
interesting.
And maybe that's a similar kind of toning down, relaxing. What's really interesting, what was really interesting for me is when I started the very first videos, and I still have them, the very first video that I ever made. And as Rob loves to tell me, it was terrible. But the very first one that I ever made, I was super stuffy and like not natural and certainly not relaxed. And what it reminds me of in retrospect is when I've hired people who are recruiting. So they're calling candidates, to try to talk to them about their careers and talk to them about jobs and opportunities and working with us and that kind of thing. And they go from being, everybody who we hire is like relatively natural with interactions. Yeah. And they go from being this relatively natural interactor to like their voice changes and like everything becomes like stuffier and more like official and formal. And it works way worse. Right. And so I remember telling a bunch of people that I've hired, you need to talk to these people the same way you would talk to your friend. Now, I don't mean you include curse words and you don't talk about inappropriate stuff, but I mean the tone of your voice should sound the way it sounds when you're talking to a friend, right? It should just sound down to earth and, that's the best way to put it, and less formal. And that person is going to basically trust, like, and respect you a lot more quickly if that's the case. And now there's some people maybe who talk to their friends just so informally that it would be a bad idea. That's for sure. But that's not what I have witnessed. What I have witnessed is that the challenge is the opposite. They're too stuffy and they need to go to the same way they talk to their friends. So I realized that for me, I was doing the same thing when it came to videos. And it was the first time too that I realized, like, wow, it's not as easy. I looked at these people who I hired and I'm telling them, talk to these people like you talk to your friends. And I'm thinking, that's so easy. Why can't you just do that? Like, talk more, right? And then it's so hard for me when I'm on camera and I'm like, now I get it. Now I know what people have been going through this whole time.
That's fascinating. And, there's a counterpart to that in my business, because I'm, client services is really, my clients are very long-term clients. And so we have account managers, obviously. And so, in some cases, it is, on the one hand, there's sort of an art or a craft to being able to keep the conversation moving towards, so that it's goal oriented. And yet at the same time, you don't want to just sit there and read off, a progression of, okay, well, here are the clicks, here are the impressions, there's a place for that, but there is a bit of a, the best account managers are the ones that can, have a good time, relax, become friends, but still not waste time and guide things from point A to point B.
Moving towards a goal. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just I just signed up for this program that basically will kind of manage the distribution of those videos for you. They have multiple people who are kind of part of the onboarding process.
Yeah.
And you can see dramatic differences in one personality to the next of exactly what I just mentioned to you. Oh. The one who is clearly talking to me in a way that they do not talk to their friends and family that way. There's no way that this is how they sound when they're sitting around with friends or with family. And then another one who sounds absolutely like they do when they're sitting around with friends and family. Now, the good news is both of them are trying to get to the goal. Both of them are definitely
interesting.
Pushing towards the desired outcome. But one of them feels like a very, business conversation. Yeah. I've got a word in mind, but I don't want to, sound too negative about it. But like, for sure, if it was like, now, if I'm going to choose, I have to have 10 more conversations. I'd rather them all be with that person who sounds like they're talking to their friend. I
agree completely. Yeah, it's hard to articulate sometimes exactly, why and all that. I mean, it may just be because, if somebody's rehearsed, I think there is a bit of an assumption that it's less trustworthy. I mean, if it is natural, it's unrehearsed, it's friendly, I think that is more trustworthy. Maybe that's all there is to it. By definition, it's like, you don't have to rehearse because you just know what you're going to talk about. And so therefore, that may just create a level of intimacy that makes things both more enjoyable, but also more promising from a professional perspective.
I think too, you said more trustworthy, and I think more, trust in two ways, right? So trustworthy in terms of integrity, obviously.
Yeah.
So trustworthy in terms of kind of likeness, right? So kind of the like, trust, respect, right? But I think the trustworthiness in all three of those, let's say, we're more likely to like, trust, and respect that they actually know what they're doing. If it's more casual, then it feels like, this person knows what they're doing. They've done this many times, and they know how to get me where I'm supposed to go.
I agree completely. And this makes me think of another topic that I remember from years ago. I read a book, and I can't recall who it was by, but it was some famous CEO. And he was saying how all the world's best CEOs who he knew all prided themselves on their salesmanship ability. They considered themselves salesmen. And then the rung down, and this is going to be such a leading question now because of the way I'm presenting this here, like the rung down people, hold sales in contempt. They don't, they're not salesmen. They would never call themselves salesmen. So according to this guy, the top tier CEOs embrace that. They think about the things that are required to be a great, maybe they've got all kinds of other great qualities too. Maybe they're, he's not necessarily limiting it to sales, but, he did make that point that top tier, amazing first-class CEOs really carry that salesmanship, trait, in a really strong way, and what do you think about that? Do you think that, do you agree with him?
It's interesting because I think that it's at least my natural tendency, and I don't know if I want to say this about humanity as a whole, but it's a little natural to be more impressed by the things that you don't have as naturally, and less impressed by the things that you can do pretty well yourself. So it's like you're not impressed by it because you can do it, right?
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's like, you have the visionaries who like naturally tend to be stronger, salespeople or influencers or whatever, because they're visionaries and they're awesome at creating a vision and a story and helping people get excited about moving in a certain direction, right? But so let's say like the visionary, and then but there's a lot more to it than that. That makes it sound like somebody just like coming up with ideas and running out of the room. But I think you know what I mean.
I do.
And then there's the operator, and the operator is really getting everybody to move in the right direction at the right time and work together efficiently to produce that outcome, right?
Yeah.
That is a vision, but that vision, you can't just say it and it becomes reality. Right now, there's the really difficult path of, and so in my mind, most leaders and most CEOs are probably more of one and less of the other, especially naturally, right? And then if they're CEOs, they've probably worked hard to try to build whatever the one that they were less naturally strong in. They probably worked hard to try to build that. But so I would guess that, CEOs fall into one of those two camps. And so the CEOs that have a good operator that's acting as either COO or president or some other title or whatever, they're probably going to be set free to be an awesome visionary and have really strong sales traits. If they don't have that secondary person who's a really good operator, then they might have to be the really good operator. In which case, it's less likely that they're a natural salesperson in my point of view. But anyways, go ahead.
So which one are you? Are you a natural visionary or natural operator?
For sure, natural visionary. I'm a pretty terrible operator. But just like I would guess somebody on the opposite side does, I've just over the years tried to work hard to make myself better. But I've gone through like a lot of peaks and valleys with this, where right now I'm kind of embracing the fact that I'm a terrible operator and trying to make the organization work despite that, instead of, in the past that I would go to a lot of seminars and training to try to boost my operator capabilities.
I think this may be why we get along so well, because I've always been most impressed with CEOs who are very self-aware. And so, for me, I consider myself the same way. I'm on the visionary side. I, for a long time, have wished I was on the operator side. I want to be a strong operator, but I really learned to embrace the fact that that's not my strength. I hire people who have that strength, and I have a team member who is who really handles that area 10 times better than I ever could. And, it is, you could call him a COO, and that would probably be the most accurate title. And that would also, now he does have some visionary abilities, but for me, I really don't have that operator background, so it doesn't really work both ways. So in any case, I think, you encounter a CEO who doesn't understand that about himself or herself, maybe is a bad operator, but doesn't deal with it, for whatever reason. That's a problem. That is really where you come up, you see a CEO where, that's the kind of CEO that I really have a problem with.
Yeah, I hear you. And that, they're all benefited from, like you said, self-awareness. And that leads to either, probably a combination of hiring people who make up for the things that aren't your strengths, as well as probably trying to work on the things that are not your strengths. But, I have to admit, I have, because I'm not this way, I do have a little bit also, again, this goes back to the whole, because I don't have this, I'm impressed with it. I have, I am in some weird way impressed by the CEOs that just think like they cannot make a wrong decision. Everything that they say and do is absolutely correct, and everybody should jump on the boat because they're the smartest person on planet Earth. And that very clearly has some downsides to it.
It does.
But it also has some upsides. And I think it's because that's not my natural personality, that in my natural way of handling it, that, you know, we're probably all like this, right? I wish I could have like a little bottle of pills for that occasionally like, hey, I need to be the person who just everything I say is the perfect answer to the problem, and everybody needs to jump on board and do exactly what I'm saying and don't question it.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think that the grass is always greener. You know, we definitely gravitate towards that, whether we want to or not. You know, if we see something else that we don't have, you know, there's a fear of missing out in also like at work there.
Yeah. Like I said, if I could just have like pills of each kind, and today I need to be the sympathetic CEO, right?
That would be a best-selling pill. I'd go into business with you on it to sell that.
We will get this figured out.
So we've talked about a lot of things, and one thing I'm not sure that I asked before was there a time when you wanted to give it all up? You were sick of being a CEO. You're sick of the responsibility, sick of the, you know, just sick of the role. Like, did you ever want to do something different than what you're doing today in a role that was not a CEO?
So if we call that, like, you know, think of that as internal conflict, I don't think I have had that exact internal conflict, but I've had one that's really similar, which has to do with like size and scale of the operation. So I've definitely had internal conflict over, I want to have the biggest organization that I can, and do everything I can to grow into that large organization. And then other times where I've thought, oh, I just want to shrink down to like as small as possible and have the you know, fewest possible headaches. And you could say that that's almost the same thing, right? That's almost wanting to.
It is almost
what I'm doing, because it's almost like, you know, quitting this, you know, leadership of a business and an organization that I'm trying to grow and scale as fast as possible. And so quitting on that. So yeah, that's been an internal conflict over time. Like I said, right now I happen to be at a phase where I'm really kind of embracing this is who I am. I'm not an operator, which leads to, you know, if I were, that would tend to lead naturally to a larger organization. Might be, you know, more difficult to kind of figure out some things creatively. I think, you know, operators might be a little bit more challenged with like figuring out game-changing ways of altering your structure to make a business grow and keep things exciting. But so I wouldn't say that I've ever had, you know, quite that. Although, okay, so here's another thing that's as close as possible to that, I guess. I've definitely had moments where I'm like, man, it must be nice to just work at IBM and like you don't really have to make any decisions. You don't have to deal with anything difficult. You just like, you know, when you punch out for the day, you can just say, I am done, and the mothership should handle anything.
But that's more. But you describe that mainly as like a momentary kind of fantasy, not something you'd pursue. Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
You know,
I remember 20 years ago that there was times like during the peak, and I'm sure you've had this, right, where the majority of time your stress level running your business is like probably like relatively similar, and then you have these short-term peaks. And so some of those short-term peaks, I can remember being in a restaurant, and as the waiter is like, you know, taking the order, I'm like, you know, that looks like nice and low stress. And just ask people what they want to eat. You know? I can do that.
I hear you there. I've talked to a lot of CEOs, and only once has somebody said to me, yeah, you know, I've got my number. If somebody offers me this number and wants me to fold into their company and I'm a cog in their company, I'm taking it. And I'm going for it, and that's it. And it's like, you know, he's got his number, he's ready to do it. He seems like he'd prefer that. But only once. And, you know, and it's interesting because he has a great business. He has, you know, people would be thrilled to have the same kind of business and be CEO of his company, I know. And now he's also done it for a long time. He's been a CEO for probably 30 years. And he took a big gap in between CEO gigs. And so, you know, maybe he's a little further along, but every other CEO I've talked to has, it's been similar to your story where it's been, there've been kind of momentary fantasies of, yeah, it would be nice to work in the mailroom but you know what I've heard a couple times, and this is interesting because this exact scenario has come up maybe 3 times where the fantasy is working in the bowels of an airport with baggage, just throwing baggage like over a shoulder, and when I heard it once, I thought, and I don't relate to that. I don't want to work in an airport, but when I heard it once, I thought, okay, that's interesting. I heard it twice. I'm like, wow, that's a big coincidence. And I heard it a third time. I'm thinking like, is there just like a group out there of people that are like, all right, let's think of like the job that is the most just mindless, and they're focused. Okay, it's got to be baggage handler at an airport. I don't know. Like it's like it's like a well-known fantasy. Of,
yeah. I have, and this is less of an opinion that I attribute to CEOs specifically, but maybe all people in high stress jobs and high stress, lots of decisions, with the unknown. I think you can ask every one of them, if somebody plunked down X amount of dollars on your desk, and so like you never had to work again, but you're not ready to just sit around watching TV the rest of your life. Yeah. What would you do as a for fun job? And I find most people have an answer for that right away. I have an answer for that.
What's that?
So yeah, mine's not in the bowels of the airport. Mine is actually like renting out jet skis. So being out like near the water.
That's a good answer.
And you come up and I've got like whatever. I've got my paper. Yeah. Like, all right. So how long do you want to ride for? And whatever. And then whenever nobody's riding, I'm just out there riding the jet ski. Right. And then I'm like sitting under a hut, when I'm waiting for people to bring them back in or whatever.
Yeah.
Hands down. Happy to do that job.
Okay. So I need to put some thought into that job, but if I were to answer it right now, I think, and this is not a fantasy job, but it is like in a parallel universe, I could see myself working at a used bookstore. I'm the only employee. And I just hang out there all day, just kind of have some coffee, just, browse the books, every now and then I've thought this fantasy through actually. Now that I think about it. So every, like once a year I take a trip around the country where I'm buying up books. And then I come back, and then the rest of the year I'm just hanging out.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
do you picture that involving a lot of people interaction with people coming in the store or no?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I mean, you got to sell enough books to keep it going, so that's part of it. But most of the time, probably not. Yeah. It's not. My first job, I was working at a place called the Italian Store. The best sandwiches you could ever. I don't know if you've ever been there because we live. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, so it's an awesome place. Yeah, we live in Northern Virginia, and so it's, most people I think in Northern Virginia have heard of this place. It's now 2 locations. In any case, independent sandwich shop. The line would go out the door. These sandwiches are in high demand. I've made thousands of sandwiches at that place when I was 17 years old. This would not be like that. My used bookstore fantasy would be, somebody'd stroll in, little bell would ring. And you talk to them for a little bit. You tell them if you got a book or not, and then they'd be on their way.
The common theme I think across all of these is going to be low stress, very little decision making, and especially no decision making that makes a real big impact. It's like, am I going to have this coffee today or this coffee today?
Now, so that all said, what I think really excites me. When I'm not daydreaming about that bookstore, what really excites me is building something. And what I really want to build, and what I take the most satisfaction in, is having built and building a high growth, high productivity team. Like I love that. I really love building almost anything though. Like I love building this podcast. I love building the business. Earlier on, I liked building the website. There's all kind, that's sort of how I relate to the world. So I wonder, having that bookstore, I'm pretty sure I would hate it after a couple weeks. a
Mhm.
day. I don't know. I don't think I would like it. I think I like to think about it, but
Mhm.
I just don't think I would like it ultimately.
I think we might make it 6 months
Okay.
before it'd be like, that's it. And then next thing you know, you'd be going like, the way that they're doing this bookstore could be done a lot better.
This is crazy. Yeah.
For
Come on,
starters,
guys.
if we do A, and then if we do B, and then if we do C, and I need to contact a website person because they can really revamp the way that they're interacting with their customers through the website. So it'd probably be a few months before all that stuff just starts naturally popping into your head.
Yeah, it starts creeping back in, and pretty soon you might as well be building a higher growth enterprise.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you might as well be like, okay, the profit margin on this is not as good. I'm doing the exact same amount of work.
Yeah, and this goes back to the whole like operator versus visionary thing. Is that like and that's why the whole grass is greener thing. I think the operator is going to be constantly saying like, how can we make this train run faster, more efficiently, more productive, more safely, more profitably, right?
Yeah.
Versus I guess the visionary is thinking the same thing, but they might be saying like, well, why does it have to be this train? Maybe we need a different kind of train. And maybe we should look at what about these train tracks, and what about the companies that, operate the scheduling for the trains, and, what about the, things that are being transported on the trains. And so I am more of that visionary or dreamer or whatever. And so however small the thing is, I am, this is where I'm just like what you just described. I am at my highest level of enthusiasm and work ethic when I'm testing out something new, whether it's big or small.
I want to thank you for being on the show.
I really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be on your podcast, and look forward to doing this in the future, maybe in reverse someday. Maybe I'll be.
Well, I'd love to have you back on. I think I think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing about this. A lot of people, don't understand about what the path is to be a CEO. So there's a lot more we could talk about, how people choose their career paths. And so I would love to, have you back on, and we can maybe explore things from a slightly different angle.
Awesome. That sounds like a plan.